Hello, Fluffers! My name is Felix, and I am a purple wolf from the United States.
And my name is Uno, and I'm a green and pink raccoon from the United Kingdom.
And welcome to Fluff It, a podcast for furries by furries.
So for today's topic, it's kind of an interesting one. We're going to talk about plushies and how they've kind of impacted the furry fandom, at least how we think, and how they've impacted us as furries as well.
Yes. So this was a topic that we brought up last in the first season. We actually allowed the viewers to vote on which episode they wanted to hear. And unfortunately for this episode, it lost. But we were very intrigued by the topic of this episode. So we went ahead and we're going to do it too. So I am super excited to talk about this topic because I think for a lot of people, don't realize how much plushies have kind of impacted how I've become a furry.
Yeah, so I mean, it's something that I honestly I hadn't thought about that much until we kind of decided to do this topic. But when I did think about it, actually, it made a lot of sense because plushies are something that I think most of us have at some point as kids, and a lot of plushies are animals and amphro animals at that. So yeah, I mean, I was definitely impacted by them quite a bit as a kid now that I think about it. So I definitely think there are a lot of ties there into the fandom, as there are with a lot of kind of things that we consume as kids that kind of ends up leading us into furriness
Yes.
later on in life.
Yeah, ironically, I have one of my plush wolves with me right now, Polka, who's like my werewolf I got for my birthday last year. So it's actually kind of ironic that he's with me right now as we talk about this episode. Yeah, so plushes kind of impact like everyone a little bit differently in the furry fandom. I mean, it's very much a topic that everyone kind of has unique experiences with. Now, plushes, I would definitely say, played a huge part in how I kind of became a furry. Now, it's not the sole thing. I mean, there's tons of things in my childhood, and that could be a potentially a future episode. Childhood influences with the furry fandom. But regardless of Scooby Doo, Hanna Barbera, Disney, Georgia Tech football games, one of the biggest things that impacted me as a furry was my plush animals. So it's I think everyone can relate that when your parents usually give you like plush animals when you're a child, and for a lot of people this is like comforting, or this is kind of like some like buddy that you can travel around with. And I remember my first plush was a elephant named Funt. And I treated Funt like he was an individual himself. And oh my gosh, I remember when my mom was sharing you the story with Hadley in the UK when she was talking about how Font had to go through the security, and I thought that he was being like teared up and eaten alive, and I was like bawling and like crying and screaming and kicking. It was not good. I was so embarrassed when she told me that. When she told
Oh
that to
no.
me. But yeah, and then I this after that, I mean, I was in love with Font, and then I got my first wolf plush, which I actually think is a husky, and then that kind of started my wolf obsession and my wolf craze. So you could say that plushes kind of started the domino effect for why I'm a wolf.
Yeah, so I mean, the first plushie that I remember having, there's two actually. One was actually I still have it somewhere. Actually, it was a cheetah, but it was like a hand puppet cheetah. So he had like this really sort of realistic looking face, but he was a little hand puppet. I can't actually remember his name. I think it was Chester, I think.
Oh,
But I know, like as a very young kid, my parents would sort of play with him with me. I can't really remember
that's
that, but
adorable.
because I know he's been around for that long, and because he's a puppet, obviously they used to do that. And then the second one that I remember having that I actually chose myself when I was very little, probably could barely even speak, was actually an alien.
Oh,
Weirdly
that's
enough,
awesome.
I had a massive obsession with aliens when I was literally before I can even remember, to be honest. And he was, I don't remember his name, but he had like a sort of fluffy green head. He looked a bit like an ant, like his face looked a bit like an ant.
Oh, that's
He had like
awesome.
antennae, but he had like a spacesuit. I think it's like a black and gold spacesuit. And I used to just be like obsessed with him. But as I got a bit older, I mean, most of my plushies, to be honest, were actual characters. So I had a Sonic that I used to carry everywhere, which is literally, I still have him, but he's literally in bits. He's one of the 90s Sonic plushies, and he's literally falling apart.
No.
And I also had a Crash Bandicoot who has a lot of holes in him now. But definitely as a kid, I mean, I wouldn't say it was one of the main things that impacted me as a furry, but I would say that when I was a kid, like all of my plushies had to be some kind of animal, or it could never be a human. It had to be an animal, or else I didn't want it. Like it had to be some sort of creature or something like that. So I would definitely say there was some sort of impact there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I remember that one of the earliest plushes I had was a Scooby-Doo plush doll. And like the Sonic plush that you were mentioning, that thing is in pieces. I mean, I'm still shocked today that it is still. But I mean, I used to take that Scooby-Doo thing or that Scooby-Doo doll everywhere. I mean, I think it's no surprise to everyone who's been tuning in and knows me, or tuning into Fluff It and knows about me a little bit, that I'm like one of the biggest Scooby-Doo geeks out there. So that started also very early. But I remember a lot of the plushes I got when I was super young were kind of like zoo animals, because I was very obsessed with wild animals. So I remember I had a lion, I had a bear, and the bear was, we talked about the bear off the recording, but it's just funny how the bear was handed out down by my mom, and that was created in the 60s and 70s, and then turns out that you have almost a very similar story with your plush bear.
Yeah.
So that was awesome.
Yeah.
And then a few other of the early plushes I remember is I had a snow leopard named Pluto, and then I had a purple bear that I just called the Purple Bear that my grandparents gifted me. And oh my gosh, I treated that thing very like religiously as a child. And I remember that my parents would occasionally interact with me about my plushes, like, oh, they had like characteristics, they lived places. I mean, at Disney we would occasionally point out where certain plushes lived. And then but I remember that at my grandparents we would allow the Purple Bear to play Trouble and a couple of other board games as kind of like this fourth character, and he was kind of like the character I would, or the person I would want to win if I wasn't gonna win. And I remember my grandfather had this very big rivalry with the Purple Bear.
Yeah, I definitely used to do similar things as a kid. I mean, I didn't have that many animal plushies. I had a couple of wolves and some bears that were, like you said, I had a bear that was handed down that was from, I think, the 70s, and a few others as well. But I was really, as a kid, I was really into insects and sort of weird sea creatures. So a couple of my favorite ones were a cuttlefish and a stag beetle. And I absolutely loved those. And I also had some of the Beanie Babies. So my first Beanie Baby was a snake. And I remember that the snake was kind of, when I got it, I think it was a present from my auntie, I think. But originally it was sort of coiled, like it had like elastic inside. But I used to like carry it around that much that it became completely like floppy and just like like a piece of string. But I mean, this is kind of unrelated, but I feel the need to say this story because I think it's quite funny. When I was a young kid, like I hated dolls. Like I would not have, like I just hated dolls. Like it had to be an animal or like some sort of action figure or something. And so I would absolutely hate anything like that. And there was this one doll that I don't know where it came from. I think my parents must have bought it, but I hated it. Like I wanted nothing to do with it. So my parents would try and sort of hand it to me and I'd just not be interested whatsoever. And then one day something happened to it. I don't know how, but the eyes came out and my mum replaced the eyes with like the realistic cat eyes that you can use for plushies. And she put these like bright neon green cat eyes into this doll. And after that, I loved it because it had become something that wasn't human. So that was a pretty weird story, but I feel like kind of as a kid, the fact that I would not have anything that was human, it had to be like an animal of some sort. That kind of leads into the fact that I grew up to like always really like furry media and, you know, furry art and stuff because it wasn't human, it was animals.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I definitely was into when I was into plushes as a young child was I also loved collecting weird animals. Still one of my favorite things to do. So, I mean, my persona is a wolf and I love bunnies, foxes, but I love like the obscure species too, and the obscure foxes, the obscure wolves. And one of my favorite animals is a manatee, and I love collecting manatee plushes. My favorite is a little Webkins named Lou. And speaking of Webkins, I don't know if you know Webkins, but when I was in kindergarten, or when I was like between the ages of 6 to ages of 10, Webkins, I think for this my generation here in here in the States, oh my gosh, we treated the Webkins like it was like Bitcoin or like some currency. I mean, everyone would bring their Webkins to school. Everyone would like give their Webkins personalities. I mean, it's for anyone who doesn't know what Webkins is, it's basically you have a plush, you buy it, then you insert code, then that plush has a virtual version of that character, and you can buy a house, you can buy furniture for your Webkins to live in. I used to give each of my Webkins different rooms, different personalities. I got a tree frog and a pig as my first two Webkins, two very strange species, or a very strange combination. And I remember, this is an embarrassing story, but I'm going to say it. So I remember when we were naming the Webkins, my dad accidentally named the pig the same thing as the frog. And I was extremely upset. I was like, how can they both have the same name? That they're gonna get confused. And I was treating it like, oh my gosh. And then my mom cleverly made the excuse, well, the reason why he has that name is he's a secret agent. He's a secret agent pig, and he needs a fake name. And I bought that, and I was completely fine afterwards.
That's amazing.
But I have so many Webkins, and that's where one of my characters, Wendy, the black cat, she was Webkins. And I have a few other characters that originated from Webkins. And I think giving Webkins personalities, giving them characters. Now, I was already having imaginary friends of my plush animals. That probably was one of the first warning signs that your son's going to be a furry. But I think this only accelerated it because I would have these these memories of just giving each of my Webkins personalities. Like, they had relationships, not like romantic, but they knew each other. I mean, some of them liked each other, some of them didn't so like each other. I mean, it was just a fun experience, and I kind of miss those days as a child because it's like the biggest problem in the world for me back then was Webkins going to be nice to other Webkins character in the make-believe world of my head. So I mean, but I would definitely say Webkins played a huge part in me plushes in the furry fandom.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because as you were saying that, I mean, Webkins, obviously I've known for a long time what Webkins are just because of seeing them on the internet, but in the UK they weren't a thing. We just didn't have them at all. But
Tragic.
it is tragic. I mean, I would have loved them as a kid, but one thing that was kind of a craze in school when I was a kid was Build-A-Bear, which I think you also have.
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, well, obviously you also have them because I've seen your werewolf. But yeah, Build-A-Bear was like a big craze when I was in school, and sometimes we would have like a one day a week where we'd kind of, for the afternoon, we'd get to just like play and stuff. So we used to bring our Build-A-Bears to school, and like that was like what you were saying, there was a whole storyline for them and like a whole world for them and stuff. And I had the Triceratops, who was like this, I mean, I don't really remember the personality I gave him.
I have Dino too.
He was this kind of like he had like a leather jacket and like jeans with like a chain on them and stuff. He was like this really cool character.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so a lot of my friends at the time would also bring theirs, and I remember we'd go to each other's houses and like play at schools where that's like awesome. All the Build-A-Bears would be the students and we'd be the teachers. just a very weird sort of world. But I mean, I definitely think something like Webkinz and Build-A-Bear, where there's a lot of emphasis on like naming your own character and giving them a personality and, you know, choosing accessories for them and stuff, I think that can really lead into like wanting to create your own sort of furry characters when you're a bit older as well, because it's very similar. Yeah,
because I grew up with Build-A-Bear too. I mean, the purple bear is a Build-A-Bear. Pluto the snow leopard is a Build-A-Bear. And I have a couple, I mean, I have a cheetah named Speedy. I had a dinosaur that I kind of copied Knuckles the Echidna called Muscles. No one knows. And then I still collect Build-A-Bear. I'll confess. I got the most recent werewolf next to me, and I've named him Polka.
I love the werewolf. It's so cute.
And then I have another werewolf named Fallon, and he's like this dark lord of like darkness. Not really. He's like the cutest, most adorable, chill wolf ever. And then I have a fox plush named Cooper that I given overalls. And then I have a few other Build-A-Bear plushes, but those are the ones I can remember the most. And I absolutely agree with everything you said, because I mean, it's kind of like furry dolls in many ways. I mean, obviously you're not going to have like a furry or a furry American Girl doll. I mean, that would be very weird. But in many ways, kind of like the plush, like Teddy Wolf, Teddy Bear kind of substituted that for people that were interested in like fluffy animals or like dragons, reptiles, birds as a child. I mean, it's like being given a character that you get to control their destiny, what they are, what their names is. And it's kind of like, and you become attached to these characters. And it definitely wants you to create personalities about them and who they are. Because I remember that Pluto, the snow leopard, was like the master of like Speedy, the cheetah, and I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what the storyline is, but I remember second grade, before I went down to Disney, there was like this whole like saga, like that they had to do side tasks and all that at the school. And the school wasn't really a school. It was like this underground, like evil organization base. My imagination gets wild, but I think I'll digress, but, or I digress there, but it kind of like those connection or this, it inspires. I feel like stuff like Webkinz and Build-A-Bear inspires character creation, and I think it definitely leads into people wanting to be, I mean, not the sole reason why people want to be furries, but it kind of introduces that to a broad general audience that, hey, you can have fun. This is a fun escape, is you can create characters this way, and there's kind of like this physical form of them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's, as a kid, like it was like my main thing that I did, because I was an only child. So like I used to amuse myself a lot with plushies and things. And like I was saying earlier, I only liked animal characters and amphro characters. So they really were like my substitute for like dolls in a way. I mean, I had like action figures and stuff, but most of those were like licensed characters, like the Ninja Turtles and stuff. But I feel like the plushies were really a way to create your own characters. And leading on to another kind of weird thing is, even though a lot of my plushies were licensed characters, I used to give them a personality
same here.
that was totally different to what they would actually have. So I actually have a plush of Predator from the movie Predator, which is like a sort of horror science fiction film. which I've had for years. I'm actually looking at it right now. It's on the shelf, but I got that as a little kid and I loved it. And in the sort of plush world that I kind of came up with, he was this sort of famous singer. And it's like, in what universe is the Predator a famous singer? But in my imagination as a kid, he was. And I remember this one story where he was like doing this massive concert and like the announcer was Mickey Mouse because that was just one of the other plushies I had. But it was, I mean, it was definitely a way to sort of create characters before I really had the kind of skill to actually create separate characters. They were just sort of substitutes for imaginary characters.
A lot of the early plushes I had kind of had some similar personalities with some of the Crash Bandicoot characters. I mean, they were different. It wasn't like carbon copies, but I mean, I remember there's characters from like racing games called Norm and Big Norm, and I have two back characters named Saturn and Big Saturn. I am the most creative wolf there ever was. Not really. But yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. And I still create characters based off of plushes. I mean, that's one thing I still do today. I mean, Cooper is a recent plush. I mean, Charles, one of my two secondary sonas, a Darwin fox, is a plush. And that's where he was created, Charles is a plush. And he's in my room right now, probably causing mayhem and destruction as I speak. I have to check on them later, but I still do it, and it allows me to, I think it's a great way to create characters if you are stuck on trying to create a persona or just a general character. We talked a little bit about this in our first episode, how to create a persona, so I won't get too heavy into it, but I mean, it is a great way to kind of, if you're stuck on a persona or creating one or creating a character, try and remember if you had any plushes and if they had any names, any personalities. Because even though that the character that you ultimately create might be very different than what they once were years ago, it's a very great way of getting your foot in and creating a fantastic character. As someone with a bunch of characters like Wendy, Charles, that were created from physical forms of plushes, I mean, it's a really wonderful way, and I feel like it allows you to build a bond and a connection already with the character before getting to know them.
I completely agree. I mean, I don't have many characters right now that are based on plushies, but some of the storylines that I used to come up with have in some ways kind of made their way into some of the stories that I tried to come up with for my current characters. And just remembering how, because as a kid as well, like, you don't really have much of a filter on, what makes a good story or, what makes sense. And especially me as a kid, I came up with a lot of very surreal sort of weird scenarios. And some of those are just so funny to look back on and try and sort of incorporate.
Same here. I think we all do.
Yeah, so I mean, anything like that. I mean, memories of stories that you came up with as a kid or characters or plushies that you had that could be characters. It's just such a good thing to kind of bounce off when it comes to thinking up some new ideas, because it's kind of going back to that childhood imagination and not having the limits of what actually makes sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, and going back to what you said about the surrealness, I mean, there's nothing bad with surreal. I mean, that's the one thing I think, and we could talk about this in a whole different topic or episode of its own, but I definitely think that people need to remember that surreal doesn't mean bad story, because I mean, some of the most memorable pieces of media out there, Alice in Wonderland, any of the Studio Ghibli movies, I mean, a lot of that is very whimsical type imagination that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but there's like something to it that draws us all in. So, and end of the day, your furry characters need to be happy with them. You are the only audience for your furry character. Is if they are making you happy, they have done their job.
Definitely. That's the only person that you need to make happy when it comes to making your own characters is you. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of them or what people think of the storylines and stuff, because at the end of the day, if you enjoy it, somebody else out there is going to enjoy it, and someone's going to appreciate your characters. So there really is no right or wrong when it comes to this kind of thing.
Yep, absolutely agree. And I mean, you're gonna make people smile when you talk about your plushes and your backstories about plushes. I mean, I have so many. I wish I could talk about them all here, but we unfortunately don't have that all the time. Um, unless if we want a 3 hour fluff it or even more, it will make the Lord of the Rings look like a short movie. And that's including all three combined. So, but I mean, I think plushes impact furries in a very positive way. I mean, it's like it's a safe physical object that this kind of makes people think about their childhood and just kind of the good parts about life. And I mean, that's just stuff that we need to kind of like remind ourselves with, especially with going into 2022 and the last 2 years having rough months for everyone. Is that, I mean, there are going to be some bad days out there, but at the same time, there are also going to be fantastic days and days that you're going to like look back and like miss. And I think plushes is a great way, or it's a great example of days that as a child you probably didn't really think about, but now you're like, oh, I miss that so much. And it's just, I mean, I'm very thankful for my parents, my grandparents, and everyone who's gifted me plushes. And it's just I think it's one of the most meaningful gifts you can get is a plush, especially if it's a handcrafted plush. I got one from you last Christmas with truffles, and oh my gosh, that thing's gonna be with me forever. I mean, I'm super thankful. But yeah, I mean, it's just a very magical thing just to have plushes and just create characters with them.
I completely agree, and I think like what you've said as well, like they're such a nice object to have. And I want to say, I think we should break like the myth that plushies are just for kids.
Oh yeah.
Because like there are so many people like our age and older who are still going to appreciate them and want to collect them, and
oh yeah,
and all sorts of stuff. And I think too many people get criticized for being too old for that, or too old for toys and stuff. But you're not. I mean, if it makes you happy and you like the look of it, and why not? There's no reason why not.
Yeah, I mean, if plushes are going to make you happy, like be happy. I mean, and who cares what people think? I mean, if people are going to be negative, you know what? That's unfortunate on them. But
yeah.
But yeah, I love my plushes, and once I move after undergrad, I'm gonna start my collection again. So, but that is all for today's episode of Fluff It. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you all had a fun time listening to us talk about plushes.
Thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any fond memories of plushies or current plushies that you really like, any favorite ones, feel free to let us know. We'd be really interested to hear about that. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed listening to our stories and our memories.
Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have any questions or comments to Fluff It, please email them at fluffitpodcast@gmail.com or message us on Instagram, and we would be more than happy to start a conversation with y'all. We love engaging with you, the fans, and we would love to hear your thoughts and opinions about plushes.
I agree. We love hearing from you all, and we hope that you're all enjoying the second season so far.
Yes.
We've had a lot of fun recording so far.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you all for tuning in.
But until the next episode of Fluff It, stay fluffy and have a flufftastic day.
We'll see you all soon. Goodbye.